Hello and welcome to The Game Changers. I'm Sue Anstice, and this is the podcast where you'll hear from trailblazing women in sport who are knocking down barriers and challenging the status quo for women and girls everywhere. What can we learn from their journeys as we explore key issues around equality in sport and beyond? I'd like to start with a big thank you to our partners Sport England, who support the Game Changers podcast through a National Lottery Award. I'm excited to say that in this, the 18th series of The Game Changers, I'll be talking to founders and entrepreneurs, the women who have set up organisations that help change the landscape for all women and girls in sport. In today's episode, I'm talking to Yvette Curtis, the founder of Wave Wahines, a female surfing club that has supported hundreds of women and girls coming into the sport, along with running surf therapy with women living in refuge, sessions for resettled young female refugees, collaborations with the Queer Surf Club, the first trans and non-binary youth surf session, and hosting the first UK female-focused surf session, which is now an annual event. There's huge recognition and celebration for Yvette's work, and just this month the club was shortlisted for the Community Club of the Year in the gender category of the National Diversity Awards. So Yvette, let's start by talking about beautiful Croyd in North Devon, where you live. And obviously being by the sea is amazing, but has that always been a part of your life, living by the sea?
Wow. Well, firstly, thank you for that introduction. That was spectacular. I wasn't prepared for that at all. Wow. Gosh, we've done quite a lot, haven't we? It's always quite stunning when someone sort of puts a massive summary together. Goodness. But in answer to your question, I have not always been in Croyd. I've lived in North Devon for the past 15 years, I think now. I actually grew up in Bristol and spent all my formative years growing up in a city, basically in a suburb of Bristol, so not sort of city central. So being by the beach was something we did maybe a couple of times a year on holiday within the UK, but also my dad's from Mauritius. So we were fortunate enough to travel back to Mauritius for family holidays. So I occasionally got to sample that, but never really spent much time by the coastline up until I took the decision to move here.
And will you stay there forever? You think the sea's a place that you'll need to be forever in the future?
I think so, yeah. Whether it's Croyd or whether it's, south of the border down into Cornwall or whether it's somewhere overseas, I think I'll always need to be, fairly close to being by the ocean. Yeah, definitely.
And it's through your children that much of your work started with Wave Wahines. But how was sport a part of your life growing up as a young girl in Bristol?
For me, it's just been always part of who I am. I went to an all-girls school as a teenager, and my favourite teacher was my PE teacher, Mrs. Seeley. Still remember her, and she has shaped everything I think I've done sport-wise. I think she was really motivational and saw a lot of talent that I maybe didn't see at the time. So I became captain of quite a few of the sports clubs. I played netball throughout my entire sort of school career. I was captain, I played centre. So I was quite a competitive young woman at that point and won sort of trophies on sports day. So for me, sport was just everything. It was part of who I was. I wasn't hugely academic, although, I did fairly well in my exams, but it certainly wasn't where I put my focus. So I'm always grateful to Mrs. Seeley for what she did. I think my dad found I'm going to give out my age now, my record of achievement from school. And in that record of achievement, I must have been 15, I suppose, I'd put in there that I was always going to work in sport and I was going to change the world by being sporty. And I was just like, I read it as maybe 4 years ago, so 40, and read it. And I was so stunned by that sentence and thought, my goodness, wow, I'm not sure I'm changing the world by sport, but I'm definitely in it.
Yeah, I think you are. I think you definitely are. I love that looking back and finding it too. And in terms of the outdoors and physical activity, obviously netball and team sports and so on, but when did that start, almost that love of outdoors?
That was into college. So I went to college in Bristol to do my A-levels. And one of the reasons I chose the college I chose, which was Filton, was because they had this incredible outdoor pursuits program that you could run alongside your A levels. It was classed as like an A level related. So you then gained qualifications in climbing, in kayaking, in powerboat sort of licensing, all of those things. So you got to do that alongside your A-level courses. So I picked that college so that I could actually continue with sport in a really different way. And funnily enough, I was in the same outdoor pursuits class as Jenny Jones, obviously now famous Olympic snowboarder. So we were friends at college and sort of went on the same trips and stuff. And I remember it was the dry slope skiing that we did at college as a group that completely put me off, because I fell over and really hurt myself. And I was like, oh my gosh, skiing and stuff and snow is not for me. And I remember that was the year that Jenny went on the overseas trip and then made the decision that that was what her career was going to be.
Oh, wow. I'd seen some social actually of her coming down to, and we're going to come on and talk about your activity, but I've seen her, so I've made that connection now of her coming down and being a supporter of all you're doing now as well too, all those years on. That's lovely, isn't it?
Yeah, because she was always a surfer as well, having grown up sort of in Cornwall. And so, yeah, she came down, and being friends, she became a captain for one of our sort of contests. And again, just super supportive, got in with the girls, did a bit of coaching with them and just a bit of mentoring. And yeah, it's really lovely when you get sort of friends like that who are just really keen to support something that's so grassrootsy. It's really lovely. And it's really incredible for the girls, because they're so starstruck when people like sort of Jenny or Laura will come along to sessions, and it's just pretty magical that we've got the ability to do that.
That's lovely. But you didn't pursue sport as a career, although I do believe you later became a personal trainer. So how did that kind of transition from your original career to personal training?
Yeah, it was really different, actually. I think life happened. I left home really young, moved out when I was sort of just before I was 18. So finished college whilst living outside of the house. So I think that became quite a challenge, and sort of just fell into a very different pattern of life, I think, that took me away from education, took me away from sport. And then I actually had my first child when I was 22. So then it just became all about sort of them and looking after them and being able to work and do all those things that should maintaining another human involve. So yeah, it was really different. And I'd occasionally do aerobics classes with my girlfriends. But then I actually got, it was actually my divorce that threw me back into sport. I found running was really cathartic, and going through a divorce was pretty challenging. So I found that running was just this amazing way of switching off and just focusing on sort of me, and just being really, really free mentally. And ended up actually, I think the year I did, so the divorce came through, I ran my first marathon.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, and never really looked back from there. So I realized at that point that, sport was just completely in me. Retrained work-wise to be a personal trainer, and that was kind of the start of where I am now, because I can see the impact it has on people. And I think if you have a sport, it doesn't matter what it is, and no matter what level you play at or what level you do it and pursue it, I think as long as you have something that is physical and active in your life, I think it's so grounding for everything else.
And so how did Wave Wahines start? So kind of moving you out running marathons and being a personal trainer, but how did it initiate? And where did the name come from as well too? What does the name mean?
Well, Wahines is a Polynesian word which basically just means female surfer primarily. So obviously we wanted to maintain that connection to its Polynesian roots. So we just went with Wave Wahines. It just seemed the perfect fit. And yeah, I think it's the perfect name for it, because I did a lot of reading around sort of surfing and its heritage and its culture, and very much wanted to ensure that we were being true to that sort of history. So yeah, that was where the name came from. But the actual club came from my eldest child. At the time, they were born female and identified as Aaliyah. Now they are a trans male and identify as Aiden. So just to clarify that. So we began because of a need. They'd come to me and said, look, Mum, I really want to go surfing. We live by the coast. And I thought, oh gosh, okay, it's the one thing I actually have no concept of. I'd had a surfing lesson as part of my 30th bucket list year, and it was great and I really enjoyed it. So totally could see the pull. But had never pursued it and never done it any other way. So I booked her a couple of private lessons, loved it, but financially that's just not a feasible thing long term. So I mean, when you're looking at now, sort of surf lessons are, upwards of £45 for a session. So it's an expensive pastime. So we looked at local surf clubs, surf organisations, but, as I'm sure you can probably imagine, they were quite male dominated, quite a lot of guys. They all knew each other. They'd all grown up together. They all had their own kit. And so it just wasn't something we could maintain. And I spoke to a girlfriend of mine, Karma Worthington, who is a former junior champion, and she now coaches actually the Team England juniors. So I spoke to her about this and I said, look, can we do something? Because my child can't be the only person in this predicament. There must be others with parents like me who don't surf, who wouldn't know what to do and wouldn't know how to get them started. But, I have my own personal training business that was really successful. So I know how to coach and I know how to run a business. So I was like, we can put the two together if you can figure out how we can get the surfing coaches. And she was really on board. And another female coach, Liv, also came on board. And we approached our local surf school, Surf Southwest, and said, look, can we trial this and just see what happens? Would you support this and how much would it cost? And they were so fantastic and just went, well, you can have the school for free. All the stuff can be free. You just need to pay the coaches. So, so between myself, Karma and Liv, I would just be there doing the organising and lots of cheerleading and warm-ups and stuff. And they would be doing the surf coaching. And we obviously stood the test of time. We obviously filled a need in the local area because, we're here 8 years later going super strong. And of that first cohort, I think we maybe had probably about 10 of them that surfed with us regularly. And of those 10, 4 of them went on to become surf coaches and lifeguards themselves. And I think that would be by and large because they were taught by female coaches. They could see there was a progression for them. So it has become a real cycle within our local community of progress.
And how important is it, do you think, that kind of non-competitive element of participating in the sport too, isn't it? I do so much on the pathway and where you are on an England pathway or a GB pathway. But actually, when I've looked at some of the work that you've done, it's just that pure joy of sport and participating. And do you think that was an important element in its growth too?
100%. Yeah, we always started the club with the sort of ethos that it was based on fun. It was all based on play. It wasn't based on who's caught the best waves, who's stood up the most, who's, you could go on. It was based on who's just having the most fun. Let's just be kids and enjoy. There's so much stress, especially, this day and age with social media, with phones, with, all the pressure to be this perfect thing, that actually just being allowed to just do whatever you want and have, salty hair, snot dripping out of your face and all that stuff that comes with being in the sea. It's just fun. And we're a really non-judgmental organisation. We always have a little bit of a recap when we have new joiners to be like, let's remember, where we were when we first started. So let's make sure everyone feels welcome. And that's one of the things that has paid off. I've had parents say to me, my child's so much more confident now, or, they're having issues at school and coming to the club has really allowed them to sort of escape those issues that they're having. So it's been, it's been really, really important to us that it is focused on the fun element, but equally, kids are kids. And there's moments where, we've had parents go, actually, this happened. And we've had to take that with our coaches and say, look, here's the moment that we need to either make sure that all of our young people are working together and just explain to them why it's really important that, anything that's happening at school, it doesn't boil over into our club. Our club is where we're all together. We're in the sea. It's, it's a dangerous place if you don't respect it. So, yeah, we are really careful with how we interact with the girls that surf with us and make sure that they all feel welcome.
And I think if I ask anyone as what we would think of as a typical surfer, it's probably a blonde, white, athletic young man would be the kind of image that's conjured up. So I'm really interested, has that always been the case? When we look back, you mentioned that kind of Polynesian history, but in terms of where surfing came from and how it's grown, is that what we would see across the world, that look and feel of a male surfing.
Yeah, that's definitely the image that is now put out there. Obviously, that image is now also translated into the feminine, but that surfer would still, by and large, you would think of someone who is blonde, athletic, petite, tan, beautiful, all of those things. But historically, it was not that. Historically, obviously, it's got roots in Polynesia. There'll also be roots historically in the African continent. So those are communities that aren't white. Those are definitely communities of colour, particularly when we're talking about the Polynesian side. It was a sport for all people. It was a pastime of queens, kings, to everybody else. You know, it wasn't something that had this massive hierarchy about it. But then, as in a lot of these moments, then colonization happens and missionaries arrive, and missionaries come to say, actually, what you're doing, it's wrong, especially for women to be doing it, because they're not wearing very many clothes, because they're in Hawaii actually, so it's probably quite warm, so they don't need to be in starch and cotton like the missionaries would have then put them in. So it was definitely an act of colonialism that then almost wiped out surfing. You then had princes that did continue that tradition of watercraft, and they travelled and took surfing to various parts of the globe at that point, the UK being one of them. I think the first place was maybe Bridport, where we had 2 Hawaiian princes that surfed here. So it did manage to stay within that Hawaiian culture, but then when it was transferred to other continents, it completely lost that identity. So it was then almost made extinct by colonialism, and then taken away by Western sort of community and civilization, and almost repackaged and repurposed and curated into what we see today. You know, it went through its obviously stage in the 70s and 80s and early 90s of just massive misogyny. It was very much a male-dominated sport, and the only females that you'd get would be in bikinis, kind of watching their boyfriends surfing. And then the females that did start surfing were definitely in the minority and probably suffered rather a lot. You know, there's an amazing film called Girls Can't Surf, which focused on that period in the 90s, where, you know, women were definitely ostracized from the community. The bikini contest, you know, got more money than the women's sort of surfers. They got put out in the terrible waves. And that's kind of what has become the image of the surf sector and surf culture today. And that's why, you know, there's clubs like ours, and there's clubs across the rest of the UK and globally that are kind of standing up and going, but that's not what surfing was all about, and it's not what it's about, and it's not who should only have access to it. So yeah, I think it's really important that we learn from that history, and we're really connected to it, because it wasn't the image that we've sort of had nicely packaged up and given to us now.
And I know, in terms of that whole making the whole sport more inclusive, following the murder of George Floyd back in 2020, which is, I think, when I first kind of came across you and all the work that you were doing. But you did a piece for BBC Spotlight about the lack of diversity in surfing and highlighting issues around access and inclusion and representation. And what was the response to your calling that out within the surfing community?
Yeah, that was pretty unpleasant. It was quite heavily trolled, millions of little microaggressions thrown in there of no one stopping them going in the water. And, you know, there's no signs. And I'm like, well, actually, until really recently, there were signs in America saying like no blacks on this beach. So that's true and untrue anyway. Yeah, so it was quite unpleasant for me to kind of witness, and I did sort of take stock of, you know, do I want to really be challenging this, and do I want to be talking about it, because it's really heavily emotional for me to have to read that stuff. It's emotional for my kids to read it. You know, my eldest obviously, you know, was a lot older then, so is on social media, can see what people are saying. So yeah, it becomes like a bigger thing then. You know, am I putting my family in a position that they haven't asked to be put in? And I sat down sort of speaking to my dad and my mum about this, and they sort of just said, you know, look, we've had abuse for all our lives, being, you know, a mixed heritage couple, but when we were growing up, or when we were sort of a couple new, it was kind of accepted, you know, like racism was just, it probably wasn't just called racism, it was just how you treat people who aren't white. And my dad said, now the law is on your side, you know, you're allowed to say this stuff, you're allowed to challenge it. And, you know, and I think it's great. He said, look, we're here sat around having fish and chips talking about race. This is fantastic. He said this would never happen when I was sort of my age, at being 40 at that time. Having that conversation around a table wouldn't have existed. It just would be something that's brushed under the carpet. So I think it would have been really, I couldn't have not stood up about it at that point, because then I was like, well, actually my dad wasn't able to, and I am, and I'm going to show my children that you don't have to accept that, and that's not right, and you can't just let people bully you because of something that is unchangeable, like the color of my skin. So that's kind of why we decided to continue with it, and I'm really glad we did. It's not been without its challenges, but I'm really comfortable that I can sleep at night with what we've done.
That's excellent to hear, isn't it? But it's weird, isn't it, that whole have a surf community, but just how communities get so defensive about it. I spoke to Sabrina Pace-Humphreys on the Game Changers podcast as well too, and she talked about the vitriol and the backlash that she'd faced when calling out lack of diversity where she lived and in the outdoor running space. So I just wonder why do you think that is, that that's almost the truth of it, because it is the truth, it makes people so angry and defensive about their sport or their area?
Honestly, that's such a big question, and I think it's really hard to answer. But I don't think it's anything. Well, most of the time, I don't think it's anything malicious. Obviously, some of it is out and out racism, but I think a lot of the time it's almost people don't want to be called names. They don't want to be called something. And if you're saying this particular thing, whether it's and it clearly is right, there is a lack of representation within certain sports and certain activities, and I think people maybe get this feeling that you're calling them a racist, you're calling them a name. And it's like, no, that's not what I'm doing. I'm saying this sport isn't representative of the world we live in. I'm not saying this sport is this.
Or you are this, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's it. I do think people think you're saying they're this really wrong and awful thing, but it's not that case. And yeah, I think maybe that's why people get so defensive, but also people don't like mirrors. You don't like to look at it and go, gosh, have I been complicit in this by not saying something? There's also that edge to it as well. So I think it's a really big question, probably massively multi-layered.
Yeah, it is fascinating though, and as you say, and as your dad said over the fish and chips, good that we are talking about it and having those conversations today too. I feel from the outside of having seen you on interviews and panels and podcasts, you always seem very calm and gentle in your approach to these discussions. So is that the case, and how has that been for you?
Well, thank you for saying that. That's really nice. I'm really glad that this is being recorded so I can play it back to my husband and go, look, see, I am really calm. Fantastic. And honestly, I haven't always been this way. I really haven't. I've been quite reactive, I would say, and definitely probably respond before I should have done, and then I'll respond in something that's really, really argumentative and really combative. So I think this has been like a real lesson that has just come with age, and has come also with how I don't like being spoken to. For me, if someone's shouting and waving their fists at me and getting really in my face, then I tend to just go, well, I'm not even going to discuss it with you because you can't hold a conversation. So I think I've now gotten to sort of that stage where I'd rather sit back, absorb the information, and then sort of come back with a discussion point. And so I think I just don't think I'm going to get the right outcome for what I want if I'm shouting at somebody or being really, really aggressive. It's not in my nature. I'm not a massively aggressive person, although my kids would say when I play Ocean Bingo, I'm incredibly aggressive and competitive.
What's Ocean Bingo?
Oh, it's literally bingo, but you've got ocean animals instead. So you're pulling out loads of different animals from the ocean. Sorry, yeah, we're literally that family. But we love it. We've got that. So yeah, so we do learn a lot, which is really good, a really good way of introducing new ocean life to them. But yeah, I am quite competitive, but I just don't think I'm an aggressive person in how I speak to people. I think, my dad's quite soft-spoken and quite gentle, and I always knew that if he had something to say, I'd be in really big trouble. So I kind of think, actually, if you're quite mild and you're quite, hopefully quite likable and usually fairly diplomatic in your thought process, then actually when you do kind of go up a slight level, then people are like, oh goodness, what have we done?
Yeah, absolutely. And how important is it, that diverse representation, I guess, in terms of gender and ethnicity and kind of all areas of diversity, in terms of the management of sport and where those decisions are being made? Is a lot of the work that we do in terms of female leadership, but how important is that in terms of the work that you're doing and surfing generally?
I think it's really important because people need to see that there's a pathway for them if they want to, continue within a certain sport or a certain sector. And the only way that you can see that happening is if you can see someone that you can relate to, someone that is, resonates with you. And at the moment, we don't really see that very much. Within other sports, it's getting better, I think. It is improving. But we certainly don't see it within surfing. Gender-wise, it's definitely improving. We've got, obviously, there's, female coaches now within the Surfing England junior squad. We've got the GB surfing manager is female, and fantastic surfer, Gwen Spurlock. She's amazing. But again, it's taken a long time. And what's been really interesting is the women that are now certainly coming through in the UK sort of management side are the ones that sort of, having spoken to them, may have struggled with getting sponsorship because they didn't fill that cookie cutter image that we were presented with. Yet they've stood the test of time. They're still here, and now they are at the upper echelons of our sport. And I think that's something that they should be really proud of. And it's definitely something that our girls get to look up to. And I think there needs to be more women going into those fields within the surfing sector, because it's so great to be a part of, but it's a challenge like anything. But if you love it, and it is life-changing.
Yeah, as you say, we need those women in the rooms and making those decisions too, don't we?
Yeah, I did a speech at the beginning of the year, and I was like, just look at who isn't in the room, and why aren't they in the room? That stuck with me. When I was doing something else within surfing governance, I was the only person to bring up the question around diversity and access. And that's never left me, because I thought, well, hang on, if I wasn't there, this would not have been discussed. Until those topics are discussed when the person in the room is the only person of colour, is the only person bringing it up, then we're not there. We're not, and we're far way away from it.
In 2022, you wrote a fantastic report about surfing and diversity, and I'll share a link to it in the show notes for the podcast too, because it was just, really interesting. I learned so much in reading that. So I guess, why did you write that report? Because they take work to create those kind of things too. And I guess, has it had impact? What have you kind of found the response to it has been?
The reason I did the research in the first place was because I couldn't find any. I couldn't find any figures, particularly in response to sort of UK surfing and sort of what it's like over here. And there didn't seem to be any happening within sort of our governance structures. So I think I just got really tired of waiting and just went, oh, how hard can it be? Turns out quite hard. So I was really lucky enough to be part of a group of sort of the Committee for Women Surfers Europe. And on that group, there's an amazing academic called Rebecca Olive. She's based in Australia, and she sort of specialises in gender studies, particularly around water. And I sort of bounced the idea off her, and she's like, oh my God, that's great. If I can help, let me know. And I was like, I can't pay you, don't you? Firstly, and she's a really good friend, and I sort of put together all the questions, sent them to her to proofread. She then just sort of came back with sort of her suggestions and experience, and then we just put it out. And when sort of the questions came back, I remember thinking, God, she's going to absolutely hate me, because I just put everything in an Excel spreadsheet and just went, there you go. Don't really know what to do with that now. And she was just phenomenal, the way she sort of found the threads of, and I'm like, God, this is why researchers are just completely different animal, because it was amazing how she pulled that stuff out. So she sent me then the key takeaways and sort of the stats. I still had all the raw data, and then just put together the report that we put together, get her to have a look at it, and then just sort of, double check that I had pulled out the right information. And that was when that went live. And I think It's been 2 years. So I think we're due to be putting together another one before the end of this year. So we can then see whether it's changed. We didn't have much response sort of from within governance. We had a lot of response from our community, though, from the surfing community and from the non-surfing community, going, God, this is why we haven't tried it before. So I think it was really worth doing. I think now when we recreate it and see how we moved on, we'll probably add, slightly different questions in addition to what we have. So we've still got that sort of baseline of knowledge. But it was just born out of a absolute need for data, because you can't get any information unless you know where you're starting from, and there was no starting point within UK surfing. So I thought, well, instead of waiting, let's just do it. And because I'm independent, I'm just me, I didn't have to have any constraints of other people saying, well, you can't ask that, we're trying to structure the information this way, we're trying to present it this way. I could just be like, well, I'm just doing it. I don't have any agenda or motives or have to get a certain result out of it. I can just be honest.
Excellent. No, that's really good to hear, isn't it? And then to see the impact that might have moving forward too. I'd like to ask, if I can, a bit about some of the programs that you've run with Wave Wahines. And I know you've done some fantastic work with Syrian refugees within the North Devon area. So can you tell us a little bit more about that, I guess, and the impact that that's had too?
Yeah, that's been so lovely to have done that. And again, that came out of the discussion around the lack of diversity within surfing. And we sort of said, look, we are running these programs, they're fully funded. And interestingly, the group that came back to us were a group of sort of resettled Syrian refugees. And to us, that was probably not the demographic we thought would happen, because I had no idea we had such a large number of resettled families in North Devon. I knew we had a couple, but yeah, it was really interesting. And obviously that then added different elements to how we looked at handling that surf program. They're coming from war, they're coming from interim sort of refugee camps potentially, different housing, language, culture, trauma, all of those things are suddenly in addition to what we had looked at. So for us, it was just like, okay, this is brilliant. We're definitely going to work with this community. It would be fantastic. But how do we then manage that for them safely and making sure that they get, what they want to get out of it? So we ensured that it was only female-led staff. We spoke to their parents. We really reassured them that through an interpreter, that we would ensure that it was only women on site at the time. They would have the option, obviously, to have full wetsuits. So they wanted to wear stuff over the top. We had access to Finisterre's sea suit, which was made for modesty. So we tried to make sure that they had as many barriers removed that we possibly could do. And we had volunteers for each young person. So that was how we started and how we sort of led that first sort of group of young women. And I remember that first sort of group, we ran over maybe 2 months. And one of the young people, they had a little sister who was 1.5, I think, at that time. And she was just a beautiful little thing. And they didn't speak any English at that point. And if we fast forward now to this year, that little girl surfed with us for the first time ever.
Oh.
And with her 2 big sisters, who were all confident swimmers, confident in the sea, diving under the waves, which made her really confident and literally was just desperate to get in the sea. And that was something that we hadn't seen from any of the other girls any other year, where she was so, I'm just going in. And I think that's a real testament to how we've operated as a club, how we've ensured that we're respectful. We don't run sessions over Ramadan. We make sure that everything is done during sort of school holidays so that it's easier for the young people to get to. We organise transport as well, because many of them don't drive, and often the buses here can be quite not the most reliable. So we try to make it as easy as possible to participate. And what we did find last year and this year was to actually ensure that the boys had an offering for the last week because it turned out that the boys couldn't believe that they weren't allowed to do it, because normally it's the boys who get the stuff to do, and this was totally sort of counterculture, really. So we did ensure that we ran extra sessions so that the brothers had something to do during the session, and they got to surf as well. And it was really empowering for the girls to be able to do something independently and to watch their brothers do something independently. It was really amazing.
You mentioned there the sort of therapeutic benefit of surfing, and I'm really fascinated. I know you've done other programs with women who've been impacted by domestic abuse. So why do you feel surfing can have such a positive impact on mental health?
Firstly, you're out in nature, which is fantastic. You're surrounded by the natural sounds and smells and fields of the natural world. So that immediately it has a sense of calming. But particularly with being in the ocean or any body of water, essentially, but in this instance, talking about surfing, it's so present. You cannot be thinking about conversations or the lawyers or the shopping list or the kids because you're too concerned with, like, is that wave coming? Am I going to have to just move my board? Do I have to do this? And it just completely clears your mind other than what you're focusing on. But also, like, water has this wonderful, like, weird quality of where it just makes you feel like you can talk. And it's not like being sat in a therapy room where you're going there specifically to have this conversation and it's going to be challenging, but you're there carrying a board with a woman that you've never really met and you don't know if you'll see them again. And suddenly you can just have this conversation about stuff that you may not have spoken about for a really, really long time, if ever, because you feel that you're in a really different space. And it's really hard to describe it. But I remember in particular with the surf therapy with the women in refuge, we were doing an exercise, and we quite often do an exercise where you tap your throat and you go, I use my voice. And I remember, one of the women found that really challenging. And I think it was in relation to sort of something that happened. So we said, look, tap your shoulders and, let's use your voice there and let's tap that bit instead. And I remember at the end of the 3 sessions that we had with that particular group, we did this really fantastic act where we yelled at the sea and just went, I'm free. And she did it, she yelled, and I remember her becoming really emotional, just said, thank you for giving me my voice back. And it's things like that you as much as over winter I always get quite stressed financially and go, oh my God, I really want to keep running the club and progress it and do this. I then go, should it go? Or can I still do it? Can it keep running? And I then go back through this whole repertoire of stuff in my head, or I go to a session and I see the girls and I watch them, jumping around and giving me hugs and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, of course this club can't not be here. This is just like, it's magic when you get to witness it firsthand and see it, no matter how sort of much things I've got on my to-do list, it's an absolute tonic when you go through like a session, or when you think back to someone who's said such incredible things that, it's really hard for me to put into words the power of surf therapy and the power of the ocean when it comes to, resilience and rehab.
And where have you found the funding for this incredible activity, historically and moving forwards too?
Historically, we've had funding from our local sort of Fullerbrook, which is a wind farm. We've had funding from the National Lottery on 2 occasions. And we've had funding from the Opening Up the Outdoors initiative, of which I'm sort of a graduate of their cohort, and we got funding with the end of that programme. We've also got a private funders that support certain programmes as well. We have had private funders that have supported our surf therapy with domestic abuse for sort of their own personal reasons. Again, it's winter now, so we're currently in that frantic, I say I'm currently in that frantic bid writing phase of sort of, what can we secure for 2025? And it's a grassroots organisation. It's a CIC nonprofit. So, like everybody in these boats, you do these passion projects and you hope somebody else sees the value in them and helps support that. But it's ultimately done out of love. And regardless of sort of the funding and the not, we just limit and we would just run it to our means, which at the moment, as long as the coaches get paid, that's fine. I don't need to take any money out of there. but it would be nice at some point to see it grow. But for me, I think the impact that we have, I would find a way to keep it going regardless of anything else. I think it's too important. And I think we've been going for 8 years, and I can't count the amount of sort of people we've probably interacted with and had such a positive impact on. And that makes me incredibly proud.
And is there an ambition to do more and to expand it further? And do you talk to other surf regions across the country that might want to emulate what you've done? Is that?
Yeah, we do. We've wanted to grow, and I think we'd want to be able to offer more. We've done initiatives, interestingly, in Bristol. We've also done things in Cornwall before.
At the Wave?
Yeah, the Wave is an inland surfing lake, sort of created, purpose-built for surfing. People have very different feelings on whether they like them or don't like them, whether they want to surf in nature or sort of in a sort of swimming pool. And it's really, I think it's opening up access to surfing in a different environment and a different way. I think, it has its own barriers as well as the ocean has its own barriers. I think, inland surf lakes also have their barriers. So I think it's just a preference on there. But we have historically run events there as well, again, because you're in the centre of Bristol. So, demographic wise, you should have a lot of demographics, that can engage with surfing, but that doesn't seem to be being the case at the moment. So that was kind of why we got involved. But in terms of our growth, it would be really nice to expand and go further and, go to different coastlines, and I think we are in that process. We found, we're looking at trailers that have got boards and stuff, and to make that more accessible and more easy for us to do. Running more events would be fantastic. Our competition has been a great success over the past 4 years. And I think that's one thing that we'll continue to grow and do, because it's just, I think we lead it as the most uncompetitive competition that you'll find.
I love that. And just your being there and my being aware of your existing and female surfing, etc. I think, there's an impact just through the awareness of what you're doing too. But have you seen a shift? I'm not sure how much these things are measured and tracked, but in terms of female participation in surfing beyond the work that you're doing in Croyd?
100%. Yeah. Yeah. When we started 8 years ago, we were the only club. We were only probably one of 2 clubs in the entire Southwest. I think it was probably us and Newquay Women's Surf Club maybe at that point. And now I think if you look around, I could probably list at least 10.
Excellent.
So I think just from that alone, that shows the growth and that shows the need.
That's so good to hear, isn't it? I was going to mention, you've obviously been shortlisted for lots of awards, but I think that's also really important, is getting you in the awareness of people within the sporting and wider sector. And I know quite recently, as I mentioned in the intro, you were shortlisted for Community Club of the Year in the gender category for the National Diversity Awards. But how does it feel to be shortlisted? I know the Sunday Times Awards is where I kind of first came across you, as it were, in 2019. But I sense from your how humble you are that it's not something that you're chasing. But I think that profile definitely has an impact and raises awareness for females in surfing.
Yeah, it's really funny, because I always find it a bit I find it really difficult to talk about and be like, oh my God, yes, I've done this and I've done that, because I'm not that sort of person to kind of, when you list things, I'm like, oh my God, this person sounds incredible. And then just go, oh my God, no, that's me. And I'm like, and I find that really quite challenging, because I'm just not that, I'm just not that person. So when these award nominations come up, it's just like, it's so overwhelming in just, I can't believe people are taking notice of what we do. And I listened to some of the nominations, particularly with the Sunday Times one. I listened to a few of the nominations and I was just in floods of tears. When I'm sort of faced with the reasons people love us and want to support what we do, it's just, some of that stuff you just don't hear in a session, and you're like, wow, that's what you wanted. And it's really quite emotional to sit and listen to it. And then, obviously the National Diversity Awards a couple of weeks ago was an incredibly big event. I was totally unprepared for sort of the magnitude of it. It was just so, it was just so 5-star. I was like, wow, this is amazing. We're in this big, it's all just really, really cool, and just full of amazing people doing amazing things. And And it's just, yeah, God, we're just this little surf club that started from, the Southwest. And I just find it insane that we're suddenly on this stage. But, I remember just saying to people, I was like, I can't believe we're here. And I'm so proud of everyone who surfed with us, coached for us every single week in, week out, all the parents that stand on the beach in driving rain and, and those communities that have just come into the UK that have trusted us with their children. I'm so humbled by that, and to get us on such a huge stage to talk about what we do, and just for people to be aware of us is just an incredible thing. And I think what was probably my favorite bit about the awards in particular was I remember going to the Sunday Times Award, and that was with my then daughter Aaliyah. And I said, it's really important we go together because this wouldn't be here without you. And then when we went to the National Diversity Awards, I remember saying the same thing. I remember saying, Aidan, I think we need to go together because none of this would be here if it wasn't for you. And I remember we went together, and it was just so incredible to be there with my son. And there were so many sort of gender expansive people there who were doing amazing things in terms of LGBTQIA plus. And him getting to meet those people and him feeling safer in his own skin than he probably has done, in a really long time was just magical for me. Getting it to share with Aidan on both of those occasions, that's why the club exists. That's why we do what we do. And the fact that it's now enabled us to look and enabled him to run a transgender youth session. Yeah, it was amazing. Trans and non-binary youth in our local area was what a joy to be able to support your son to do something like that in a space that is definitely not usually represented by communities like his.
That's beautiful. You're now also working for Surfers Against Sewage. So can you tell us a little bit more about the organisation and your role there?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm the Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Manager at SAS, Surfers Against Sewage. I've been there for a year and a half now, and it's been really interesting to work within that sector. I've always been really passionate, obviously since the surf club, about the ocean and about ocean health. But prior to that, probably not so much. I probably didn't think about my day-to-day activities and how I am affecting the ocean because I was so far away from it. But the past sort of 8 years has definitely taught me a lot about the importance of sort of preserving that life source. And then the opportunity came up within SAS. So I applied, and it's been amazing to learn about that. But I think the reason it's been so relevant is because the barriers to surfing and surf culture and the ocean are really similar barriers to then ocean advocacy, conservation and activism. They work together so well in terms of how I work and how I think and my beliefs, that, with Wahines, the wider picture to kind of become connected to your ocean by sport and by access into surfing. That access into surfing then enables you to care about the water, to care about the ocean. Then how can you go about preserving it and advocating for it and all those things? So it's just, they're so symbiotic as a pair of things to work with that I see them like barrier wise, they're really similar, but also just in terms of the growth, I think they're just a perfect partnership. So I've been really lucky to kind of work within that sector now.
If you'd like to hear from more amazing trailblazers like Yvette, there are over 200 episodes of a Game Changers podcast that are all free to listen to on podcast platforms or from our website at fearlesswomen.co.uk. Along with other entrepreneurs like Yvette, there are elite athletes, coaches, broadcasters, scientists, journalists and CEOs, all women who are changing the game in sport. As well as listening to all the podcasts on the website, you can also find out more about the Women's Sport Collective, a free, inclusive community for all women working in sport. We now have over 8,500 global members, so please do come and join us. The whole of my book, Game On, The Unstoppable Rise of Women's Sport, is also free to listen to on the podcast. Every episode of Series 13 is me reading a chapter of the book. Thank you once again to Sport England for backing the Game Changers and the Women's Sport Collective through a National Lottery Award, and to Sam Walker at What Goes On Media, who does such a superb job as our executive producer. Thank you also to my lovely colleague at Fearless Women, Kate Hannon. You can find The Game Changers on all podcast platforms, so do follow us now and you won't miss out on future episodes. Come and say hello on social media, where you'll find me at Sue Anstis. The Game Changers. Fearless Women in Sport.